So my background is in computational neuroscience and applied math. I went to Google about 12 years ago, and my first number of years that I was working there, the main project was to add AI features to Android and Pixel phones. So most of the AI in those phones over those years came from teams that I built. Some of these features are things like face unlocking and music recognition, this feature called Now Playing. We built predictors of next words for the keyboard, the Google keyboard, Gboard. And these things were called AI, but they weren't really AI in the sense that researchers meant when they invented that term back in the 1950s. When we thought about AI as kids, it probably wasn't face recognizers or handwriting recognizers or something like that. And that was why the term artificial narrow intelligence and artificial general intelligence were invented in order to draw that distinction. So artificial narrow intelligence is models that are trained for doing specific tasks like these. Artificial general intelligence is a robot you can have a conversation with. And we didn't have artificial general intelligence, but we did have these models for doing things like next word prediction. We always assumed that these statistical models for next word prediction were inherently going to be very limited, because if the first word is Humpty, then it's easy to statistically predict that the next word is going to be Dumpty. But if the previous words are a word problem, a mathematical word problem, or a story, and the next word is how does a character in that story feel at this moment or something, of course statistics won't be enough to answer that. Those are problems that are called AI complete. So it was quite a shock when we basically scaled up the same sorts of models and built things like Mina and Lambda in 2020, 2021, and found that they could actually answer those kinds of questions. They were able to solve all of those kinds of general AI problems. And this was a bit of a shock, because they really are, in some sense, just autocomplete. But the neuroscientist in me maybe shouldn't have been so shocked, because there is at least one theory in neuroscience that goes back a long way, at least to Helmholtz in the 19th century, certainly to the cyberneticists in the 1940s, that brains basically are autocomplete. That the reason we develop nervous systems is to predict the future given the past in order to be able to affect it. So there is some sense in which the fact that these models that just predict the next word end up being intelligent is validation of an old idea in neuroscience. So this was quite a shock, but I began around the same time to write books. A lot of these books, in fact all of them, are questions. Even the first one, which was fiction in 2022, ubi sunt is Latin for where are they, and the other ones all have question marks at the end, so they're questions. It's taken me a while to figure out what the underlying theme or the question was behind all of these books that I began writing around this time, that it started to become clear what AI was really about and what it told us about ourselves. The last of these books, which is coming out in September, What is Intelligence, addresses that one head on. But the other ones are as I said, fiction, social science, and theoretical biology. And I think that if there's an underlying theme behind all of these, it's the idea of major evolutionary transitions, which is a concept that was introduced by two evolutionary biologists, Jor Safmari and John Maynard Smith, in the 1990s. And the question they were asking is, why does life become more complex over time? Why is it that we began on Earth with single-celled organisms, and then we got multicellular organisms? Somewhere in there, the cells became more complex when mitochondria made their way into archaea, and we got eukaryotes. Why do those multicellular animals become more intelligent over time and form societies and eventually launch spacecraft and do all kinds of crazy things like this and even develop AI? So they called these major evolutionary transitions. Their initial list is, includes some of the events that I've just described, and they've added a few since then. And I think we're going through another of these right now, which is the emergence of AI. So what do these transitions have in common? Well, why do they happen? Is life actually becoming more complex, and why is that taking place? And are we in the end times? No, I don't think we're in the end times. Yes, life is becoming more complex. And I think the answer to the question of why is a very counterintuitive one, and one that I've only come to appreciate in the last year or so, which is that I think life is computational. It's kind of right there in Smith and Sathamati's paper when they say these changes involved changes in the way information is stored and transmitted, which is computation. And indeed, the original model for, the theoretical model for computation for a computer, which was introduced by Alan Turing in the 1930s, is sort of a very simplified version of a machine like that one. It's a tape, and it follows instructions to move that tape left or right by one square at a time and read, write, or erase symbols on that tape. What Turing proved was that a very, very minimal system like this one could compute anything that can be computed, given enough time and enough tape. And the point here really is that this is a minimal system for following instructions in order to carry out a function. Now, I think of Turing as one of the two fathers of computer science. The other one was John von Neumann. And von Neumann had a really profound insight that has not been fully appreciated also in the 1940s, early 1950s. He published it in a paper that didn't come out until after his death in The Theory of Self-Reproducing Automata. And his insight was as follows. He was thinking about how it is that a thing made out of Legos, let's say, can float around on a pond in which there are lots of loose Legos floating, and how it can take those Legos and assemble another robot like itself out of those pieces. It seems a little bit like lifting yourself up by your own bootstraps to make something as complex as you are. And he realized that what that would require is for that robot to have a tape inside itself, an instruction tape, that says how to build me, and to have something that he called a universal constructor, which would be able to follow the instructions on that tape to assemble whatever the tape says. And as long as the instructions for building the universal constructor itself are included on the tape, then you can have reproduction, you can have healing, you can have growth. Basically, you can have life. Because what I've just described, of course, is exactly the way a cell works, or in fact, the way our bodies work. And the kicker is that this universal constructor is a universal Turing machine. In other words, that thing at the core of all of our cells of every living system is literally, mathematically, formally a computer. So in that sense, I think the insight was von Neumann's. Life is computational at its heart. You can't reproduce without computation. You can't grow, you can't heal without computation in every cell. So my team and I were exploring this idea last year, and we published a paper in June of 2024 called Computational Life, How Well-Formed Self-Replicating Programs Emerge from Simple Interaction, that really showed how it is that self-replication can emerge out of nothing. This is the problem that sort of flummoxed Darwin when he thought about how it is that evolving systems could have arisen in the first place. Darwin understood how evolution worked once you had something like this tape, once you had reproduction, once you had selection for fitness. But what he really didn't understand is how life could arise in the first place. If you're religious, of course, you have one kind of idea about how that might have happened. But Darwin was interested in a naturalistic explanation, as we were. And the experiment that we did involved the following. So we took a very simple Turing complete language, whose name I won't say so that I don't have to be beeped out. This language was not named by us. It was invented in the 90s by an amateur juggler and computer scientist, which explains a lot. So it's a very minimal computer language. It's based on only 8 instructions. Those 8 instructions are exactly Turing tape or Turing machine-like. They involve a head on a tape. The instructions are move left 1 square, move right 1 square, increment the byte at the head, decrement the byte at the head, and there are 4 other ones. They're very, very simple, but with just those 8 instructions based on Turing's theorems, we know that you can build any computer you like. You could run Windows with nothing but these 8 instructions. That's the 8 instructions and what they do, if you must know. The experiment involved taking lots of tapes, short ones, so length 64, and starting by filling them with random bytes. So they're just random tapes. I'm just printing a bunch of them here, and I'm only writing the instructions, the bytes that end up being instructions, which is 1 in 32 of them. Remember, there are only 8 instructions. There are 256 possible bytes. So every tape only has 1 or 2 instructions on it, and they don't do anything interesting, right? These are not real programs. The recipe consists of taking 2 of these tapes at random out of the soup, sticking them together, running them, taking them back apart, and putting them back in the soup, and that's it. And then repeating that over and over, kind of as if they were molecules in a solution. And if you do that, I'll show you what happens on my laptop. This was pretty much the first time that I got it to run, so I just took out my phone and took a video of my screen. You begin with random bytes, and after a few million interactions, something really magical happens, which is that programs emerge. And these programs are complex. They're full of instructions, and they're quite hard to reverse engineer. What on earth are they doing? Well, they're reproducing. So those programs are copying themselves. Why? Well, because once a program can copy itself, then that means that it will still exist in the future. Something that can't copy itself will get overwritten by something else that can copy itself. We talk about some matter being robust or being durable. If you have a statue made out of granite, it's highly durable. But still, the only thing that can happen is for it to break over time, for it to gradually blur and erase. But if something can replicate itself, then it will exist forever. And so there is a stability about things that can replicate themselves that makes them, if you like, selected for in ways that inanimate matter is not selected for. And so that's why they emerge, because ultimately they're the things that persist through time. But there's a remaining mystery here, which is, in this case, there were only 8,000 tapes, starting, there were the length 64. That doesn't seem like enough randomness to produce these very complex programs. How do we get from only a few instructions, a couple of instructions per tape, to these very complex programs? And when this happens, we get, these programs are too complex, if you like, to arise in a purely random way from that starting point. It looks almost like intelligent design. Why is that happening? This is, by the way, what that looks like in terms of amount of computation happening in that soup. So I've drawn here the first 10 million interactions in a particular run. Each interaction is a dot. The x-axis is time, and the y-axis is how much computation took place in that interaction. And what you can see is that there is a discontinuous transition right at 6 million interactions in this particular case, where suddenly the soup starts to compute, because the process of copying or replicating is a computational process. So you can think about this almost like 2 phases of matter. On the left is a phase of matter that is disordered, like a gas, and on the right is a phase of matter that you could call life. It's purposive. All right, so why does it become more complex over time? Well, Lynn Margulis, I think, came up with the answer back in 1969. She was the one who figured out that eukaryotes, the complex cells like the ones that make up our bodies, are made out of mitochondria that made their way inside other cells in an act that she called symbiogenesis. In other words, a symbiosis between 2 parts that made something more complex than those parts, made a whole more complex than those parts. And it turns out that that's exactly the same thing that's happening in the soup. When you first start running this thing, you occasionally get a single byte that manages to replicate itself. And what happens is that those individual bytes sometimes team up. That is to say, they manage to find themselves next to each other, and the pair can reproduce better than one of them could on its own. And that process repeats and ladders up, and that's how you get complexity. It's basically all about teamwork. And that form of teamwork is just as natural as evolutionary selection itself, and it's a key part of the way evolution works, we now believe. And that's the same process that has led to the human intelligence explosion. When we look at how it is that we went from being individual stupid animals to collectively brilliant animals, as we are today, it really has nothing to do with what's going on in individual brains and everything to do with how we collaborate together. I sometimes joke that if you take an average Manhattanite out of their apartment and ask them, why does the toilet flush when you push the button? They won't know, right? Individually, we don't know a lot, but collectively, through teamwork, we know a great deal. And it's that collective intelligence that we really are talking about when we talk about human intelligence, not what we can do individually. And there's a kind of arms race, a friendly arms race, if you like, that happens when people are trying to predict each other. As you try to predict others, as you try to model their minds, your brain has to become more complex. But then when you're trying to be, when you're the subject of that prediction, then somebody else has to be more complex in order to predict your mind, and so on. And that's the kind of one-upsmanship that has led to these intelligence explosions. We can see that the brains of different animals become larger as their troop sizes grow, or looked at another way, as the troop sizes grow, their brains have to become bigger. And we've seen these social intelligence explosions not only in humans, but also in whales, and in the smarter birds like parrots, and in a couple of other places. So scaling cooperation and competition is the way intelligence rises, the way complexity rises. It's all a part of the same process. And this is the connection between the last two books that I've written, What is Life and What is Intelligence. I've come to think about life as a self-constructing computational phase of matter that complexifies through symbiogenesis, and of intelligence as the ability to predict and influence one's future, which complexifies through symbiogenesis. They're kind of one and the same thing. All right, so I just want to leave you with a few points to end. First, we have been thinking about AI as this kind of alien invader, this other that comes to us, in the 2020s. And I've increasingly come to realize that that's not the case. For one thing, we got AI when we began to train it on human experience. And so it is about as human as it gets from an information standpoint. It also is computational just like us. And in that sense, it's a part of that same evolutionary process that's been going on Earth for more than 4 billion years. Biology is computational too. It's been a long time since individual humans were the pinnacle of intelligence on Earth. It's human society as a whole, collective, that is intelligent in that way, and AI is increasingly a part of that collective intelligent fabric. In that sense also, it's not alien, it's actually a part of what we are in some bigger sense. Humanity is collectively brilliant. Humanity plus AI is going to be even more collectively brilliant. And finally, this symbiosis that's emerging between AI and humanity, I don't want to be too Pollyanna about it. Symbioses can be hard, they can be disruptive, they can lead to complexity, they can lead to civilizational troubles of various kinds, but ultimately they're rich and positive. That's how they've been for the last 4 billion years, and I have no reason to expect that this next one won't be as well. And I will end there. Thank you all so much.